The music rumbled so loud that the walls shook. Catalina Valverde parked her black SUV in the parking lot of the Moonlight nightclub. It was a particularly busy Friday night. They had a famous singer performing, and the crowd of patrons stretched well beyond the entrance. She adjusted her dark blue dress and headed for the service entrance. The guard, Miguel, nodded respectfully, opening the door for her. Inside, the bass echoed in her chest and the air was filled with a mixture of expensive perfume and smoke. Catalina adjusted the gold bracelet on her wrist, a gift from Ramiro for their 5th wedding anniversary. As she made her way through the crowd of dancing people, she noted the details. Bartenders barely had time to serve customers. Waitresses maneuvered between tables with trays full of cocktails, and the VIP area was full. Things were going well, very well. On stage, a singer was performing his new hit song, and the crowd was going wild. Catalina smiled. Inviting this star was worth every peso spent. She climbed the stairs to the administrative area of the club, where the music was muted. In her small office, the first thing she did was to turn on her computer and start going through the week's reports. The numbers were pleasing. Revenue was up 15% over last month. Catalina was making a few notes on the paperwork when there was a knock on the door. "Come in." She looked up from the monitor. Paulina, their accountant, stood on the threshold with a pile of papers in her hands. "Señora Valverde, you need to sign the paperwork for next month's deliveries." Paulina placed the folder on the desk. Catalina scrutinized each page carefully before putting her signature on it. She never signed documents without looking, a habit developed over years of doing business. After Paulina left, she decided to stop by her husband's office. Ramiro's office was at the end of the hall. She knocked and entered when she heard his voice. Ramiro Balmaceda was sitting at a massive mahogany desk talking on the phone. He was dressed in a dark suit that perfectly emphasized his statuesque figure. Seeing his wife, he smiled and gestured for her to sit down. "Okay, we'll discuss the details tomorrow." He ended the conversation and put the phone down. "How are you doing, darling?" "Everything's great. The singer drew a full house as we expected." Catalina took a seat in the leather chair across from her husband. "It was the right decision. I think we should invite stars of this caliber more often." Ramiro leaned back in his chair. "By the way, have you looked over the contract with the new vendors?" "Yes, I just signed it. The prices are a little higher, but the quality is worth it." Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden knock on the door. A panting Alejandro, the club manager, flew into the office. "Señor Balmaceda, Señora Valverde, there's a fight in the hall. 2 patrons didn't share a table in the VIP area." Ramiro instantly stood up. "Where's security?" "Already there, but the situation is getting out of control. One of the attendees is Senator Morales' son." Catalina felt her husband tense. Contacting the family of a powerful politician was highly undesirable. "Let's go," Ramiro said briefly, and headed for the exit with a quick step. Chaos reigned in the VIP area. 2 young men, clearly intoxicated, tried to reach for each other while they were held back by the guards. Broken glasses crunched under their feet. Frightened girls clung to the walls. Ramiro acted quickly and confidently. He approached the senator's son, said something quietly in his ear, then nodded to the guards. In a few minutes, both participants of the conflict were led out through different exits, and the waiters were already cleaning up the traces of the mayhem. Catalina watched her husband with admiration. He has always been able to resolve difficult situations, to find the right words, to smooth out the sharp edges. Perhaps it was this ability that helped him build a successful business from scratch. Toward morning, when the last customers had left the club, they got into Ramiro's car. Catalina felt tired after a long night but was satisfied. Despite the incident, the evening had been a success. "Tired?" Ramiro put his hand on her knee as they waited for the green traffic signal. "A little, but it was worth it." Did you see the line at the entrance? Yeah, haven't seen one like that in a while. We should think about expanding the hall. He tapped his fingers on the steering wheel thoughtfully. They drove through the deserted streets of Santiago. The city was still asleep, with only the occasional early passerby and street vendor preparing for a new day. Catalina covered her eyes, remembering the events of the evening. She loved her job, loved the atmosphere of the club, loved seeing the satisfied faces of the customers. 5 years ago, when Ramiro had asked her to become not only his wife, but also his business partner, she hadn't doubted the decision for a second. Their penthouse greeted them with silence and coolness. Ramiro went straight to the shower and Catalina stayed in the kitchen for a drink of water. Her mind was already beginning to form a plan for the next day. She would need to check the technical equipment, discuss a new batch of high-end alcohol with the suppliers, and review the resumes of the candidates for the new bartender's position. Falling asleep in their large bed, Catalina felt peaceful. Ramiro was already asleep, his breathing calm and measured. She turned on her side, gazing at his profile in the half-light of the bedroom. How lucky she was to have a husband, smart, reliable, successful. Together they'd built a thriving business and a strong family. Tuesday was surprisingly quiet. Catalina arrived at the club earlier than usual. She had to check the new air conditioning system installed the day before. The morning sun was flooding the empty dance floor where the cleaners were finishing their work. She loved the club at these hours, quiet, filled with morning light, smelling clean. Alejandro was already waiting for her in the administration area of the building, holding a file folder. His always perfectly ironed shirt and polished shoes spoke of the pedantry that was so valued in their business. "Good morning, Señora Valverde," he greeted her. "The technicians have finished setting up the system. Would you like to check it out?" Catalina nodded and they walked down to the main hall. The cool air was evenly distributed throughout the room, just what they needed for the hot, Chilean nights. She made a few notes in the notebook she always carried with her. "What's on the schedule today?" she asked, heading back up to the office. 3 o'clock meeting with the lighting maintenance company, DJ coming in at 5 to discuss the playlist for the weekend. Alejandro checked his clipboard. "Oh, and one more thing. There's a girl coming in, wants to talk about gigs. She's waiting in the lobby." Catalina raised her eyebrows in surprise. Why didn't she sign up in advance? Says she's come from far away. She looks serious. Okay, let her wait. I'll go through the mail first. In her office, Catalina plunged into her work routine, answering emails, checking invoices, coordinating the schedule of appearances for the next month. Time flew by, and when there was a knock on the door, it was around noon. "Señora Valverde, you have a visitor," the receptionist peered in. A young girl entered the office, tall, slender, with long dark hair and expressive brown eyes. Her simple black dress favorably emphasized her figure, and the minimum of makeup on her face spoke of natural beauty, as fashion magazines like to write. "Soledad Valdez," she introduced herself, extending her hand. Her voice was deep, with a slight hoarseness. "Thank you for accepting me." Catalina gestured for her to sit down. "What can I do for you?" "I'm a singer. I perform in small clubs in the south of the country, but I want to try my hand in the capital. Your club is one of the best in Santiago, and I'd be happy to get a chance." There was sincerity in her words, but Catalina was used to such requests. Every week there was someone who dreamed of the big stage. "We have pretty high standards for performers," she began. "I'm ready to audition right now," Soledad interrupted. "I have performance tapes, letters of recommendation, and I can really sing." At that moment the door opened and Ramiro walked in. He stopped when he saw his visitor, and an interested smile appeared on his face. "Am I interrupting?" he asked, shifting his gaze from Soledad to his wife. "No, we are just discussing the possibility of an audition. Señorita Valdez wants to perform for us." Ramiro perched on the edge of the table. "And what is your repertoire?" "Latin American pop music, some jazz. I can do covers of famous hits, but I prefer to sing my own songs," Soledad spoke confidently, looking straight into her eyes. "Well, let's hear it," Ramiro suggested unexpectedly. "Alejandro can organize everything right now. Catalina, would you mind?" Catalina shook her head. After all, one audition meant nothing. Half an hour later, they were sitting in an empty auditorium. Soledad stood on the stage, the technician adjusting the microphone. She looked completely calm, as if she performed in front of an empty auditorium every day. The first notes of the melody filled the room, and Catalina involuntarily pitched forward. Soledad's voice was amazing, strong, sensual, with an amazing range. She was singing an old ballad about unhappy love, and she made the familiar song sound completely new. Ramiro sat motionless, keeping his eyes on the stage. Catalina noticed his fingers beating a rhythm on the arm of the chair, a sure sign that the music was catching him. As the last sounds dissolved into the air, silence hung in the hall. "Impressive," Ramiro was the first to break the silence. "Do you have anything else?" Soledad nodded and began a new song, this time more rhythmic in the style of modern Latin. Her movements on stage were natural and graceful. She was clearly in her element. After the third song, Ramiro stood up. "I think we've heard it all. Catalina, what's your opinion?" "She's really talented," Catalina admitted. To deny it would be foolish. "I suggest we start with a trial performance this Friday." Ramiro turned to Soledad. 3 songs before the main program. If the audience likes it, we can discuss an ongoing collaboration." Soledad's eyes lit up. "Thank you. I won't let you down." "Alejandro, prepare a standard contract for 1 performance," Ramiro ordered, "and organize a rehearsal with our musicians tomorrow." As Soledad left, Catalina asked her husband, "Are you sure? We usually vet performers more thoroughly." "She has what it takes, talent and charisma. The audience will feel it," Ramiro was clearly pleased. "Besides, we need something fresh. We're tired of the same faces on stage." Catalina shrugged. He might be right. After all, it's only 1 performance. The rest of the day passed in the usual worries. The meeting with the technicians dragged on. They had a long discussion about upgrading the lighting equipment. Then they had to deal with a supplier who brought the wrong kind of wine. Catalina didn't even notice how evening came. Around 9 o'clock, the first customers began to arrive. Tuesday wasn't the busiest day, but their club was never empty. Catalina watched the staff work from her office through the surveillance camera system. The bartenders were mixing cocktails. The waitresses were taking orders, and the security guards were keeping a close eye on order. She returned home at midnight. Ramiro stayed late at the club, said he had something to discuss with the DJ. Catalina showered and settled into bed with a book, but she couldn't read. Soledad's face stood before her eyes, her confident gait, her graceful movements. Something about the girl made her wary, but Catalina couldn't figure out what it was. Perhaps just professional jealousy of the young talent. Ramiro returned an hour later smelling of whiskey and cigarettes. He gave his wife a quick kiss and headed for the shower. Catalina turned off the light and closed her eyes, trying to sleep. There were still 3 more days until Friday, and she hoped her vague fears would be in vain. Soledad's first performance had been a resounding success. The audience was ecstatic, and the club received a lot of rave reviews on social media. Catalina watched this success with mixed feelings. On the one hand, the growing popularity of the club couldn't help but make her happy, but on the other hand, something was bothering her more and more. Ramiro immediately offered Soledad a permanent contract. Now she performed 3 times a week, and each time the hall was full. Her simple but catchy love songs resonated with the audience. That morning, Catalina stayed home longer than usual. She was going through some papers in her home office when the phone rang. It was Mariana, her best friend. Are you free today? Let's meet for lunch, she suggested. I have a meeting with my suppliers at 1 o'clock. Catalina looked at her day planner. But I can do it before that. They agreed to meet at a small restaurant near the club. Catalina arrived first and took their favorite table by the window. Mariana showed up 10 minutes later, spectacular as always in her red business suit. You look tired, Mariana remarked after they had ordered. A lot of work. The club is at the height of its popularity right now. I heard about your new star. They say she's amazing. Catalina shrugged. The public loves it. Do you? She's talented, you can't take that away. Mariana looked at her friend carefully. But? I don't know. Catalina stirred her coffee. It's just some weird feeling. It's like Ramiro is obsessed with her success, spends hours with her discussing repertoire and some promotional plans. Are you jealous? Mariana asked bluntly. No, maybe it's not that. He's become different. We used to always discuss important decisions together, but now he just puts me on the spot. Like what? I found out yesterday that he ordered new lighting equipment specifically for her performances. Very expensive. Didn't even consult me, just signed the contract. Mariana sipped her cappuccino thoughtfully. You know, maybe we should take a closer look. At that moment, their order arrived. Seafood salad for Catalina and pasta for Mariana. They ate in silence for a while. What does Paulina say? Mariana asked suddenly. About what? About expenses, contracts, the whole thing with the new singer. I haven't seen her in a while. She started working mostly with Ramiro, says he insisted on it. Catalina frowned, realizing she hadn't paid much attention to it before. Interesting, Mariana stretched out. Very interesting. After lunch, Catalina drove to the club. At the entrance, she ran into Soledad, who was getting out of a cab. The singer was wearing an expensive designer suit that Catalina hadn't seen her wear before. Good afternoon, Señora Valverde, Soledad said hello with a slight smile. Beautiful weather, isn't it? Good afternoon, Catalina replied dryly. At the club, the first thing she did was head to the accounting department. Paulina was sitting at a computer covered in papers. Paulina, I need the latest financial statements, Catalina said. The bookkeeper became visibly nervous. Señor Balmaceda asked that all documents be given to him first. I am a co-owner of this club and I have every right to see the financial records, Catalina said firmly. Paulina reluctantly opened the safe and pulled out a folder. Just please don't tell Señor Balmaceda that I showed them to you. Catalina settled into her office and began to study the documents. The figures didn't add up. Expenses were much higher than usual. Strange payments to unknown firms appeared. And what were these consulting services that took large sums of money? She pulled out her laptop and opened the IRS database. After half an hour of searching, she found that one of the firms receiving payments from the club had been registered only a month ago. There was a knock on the door. It was Alejandro. Señora Valverde, Señor Balmaceda asks you to come in to see him. Ramiro was on the phone when she entered his office. Soledad was sitting in a chair making notes in a notepad. At the sight of Catalina, she smiled welcomingly. Ah, darling, Ramiro finished the conversation. We're just discussing a new concert program. Soledad has some terrific ideas. I see. Catalina sat down in the vacant chair. I've been going over the latest financial reports. She noticed Ramiro tense up. Why? I told you I was going to handle the finances myself. It's my business too, remember? Metal appeared in her voice. Where are these extra expenses coming from? Honey, let's discuss this at home. Ramiro cast a quick glance at Soledad. I think I'll be going now. The singer rose gracefully. I'll see you tonight at rehearsal. As the door closed behind her, Ramiro leaned back in his chair. You're making a big deal out of this. All these expenses are necessary to grow the business. Really? And that's why you kept them from me? I wasn't hiding anything. I just didn't want to burden you with the details. And the new consulting firm? The one registered a month ago? Are you following me? There was irritation in his voice. No, I'm just protecting our business. From who? From me? Ramiro stood up. Will you stop being paranoid? I'm doing everything for the club to thrive. Look at the results. We've never been more successful. Catalina stood up too. It's not just about money, Ramiro. It's about trust. He walked over to her and put his hands on her shoulders. Honey, you're just tired. Take the day off. Get some rest. I can handle everything. She shook off his hands. Don't talk to me like that. I'm not a little girl. Then don't act like a jealous teenager either. That comment struck a nerve with her. She turned around and walked out of the office, feeling the anger boiling up inside. In the hallway, she ran into Paulina, who was fearfully clutching some papers to her chest. Back in her office, Catalina locked the door and pulled out her cell phone. She needed to speak to Mariana urgently. Something was happening to her business, to her husband, to her life, and she needed to figure out what it was. Soledad's popularity grew with each performance. There were now lines at the club entrance even on weekdays, and tables had to be booked a week in advance. Local newspapers wrote about the rising star, and radio stations played recordings of her songs. Catalina sat at her desk, perusing the morning press. On the front page of the entertainment section was a photo of Soledad walking out of an expensive boutique with bags of famous brands. Santiago's new nightlife sensation, the headline read. There was a knock at the door. It was Paulina, pale and anxious. Senora Valverde, I must speak to you. The accountant nervously rubbed the edge of her blouse. Come in, sit down. Catalina set aside the newspaper. What's wrong? I'm not sure I should talk about it. Paulina sank into a chair. Senor Balmaceda has strictly forbidden. Paulina, we've known each other for 5 years. If there's anything wrong with the club's finances, I need to know. The accountant pulled some documents out of a folder. Here, take a look. These are last month's payments. Note the recipients. Catalina scrutinized the papers. The amounts were impressive, and they all went to the very consulting firm she had recently learned about. Who owns that company? I tried to find out, but the information is closed. All I know is that the incorporation went through a law office downtown. And what's this? Catalina pointed to a strange entry in the expenses. A new contract to organize performances. Senor Balmaceda signed it yesterday. Now all proceeds from Soledad's concerts will go through a separate account. Catalina felt herself grow cold inside. She stood up and walked to the window. There was a new sports car in the club's parking lot. Ramiro had bought it 2 weeks ago, saying it was necessary for the image of the place. Thank you, Paulina. I'll take care of it. After the accountant left, Catalina called Mariana. You were right, she said as soon as her friend picked up the phone. Something isn't right here. I can help. I have a contact at the IRS. No, not yet. I'll talk to Ramiro first. But talking to her husband wasn't so easy. He was away all day at some meetings, and in the evenings he was busy with Soledad. They were rehearsing a new program. He came home late, smelling of whiskey and expensive cigars. That night the club was particularly crowded. Soledad was introducing new songs and the audience was frenzied. Catalina watched the performance from her usual spot at the bar. The singer wore a sparkling silver dress that seemed to have been made especially for her. Looks beautiful, doesn't she? Came Ramiro's voice. He had approached unnoticed and was now standing next to her, never taking his eyes off the stage. Yes, impressive, Catalina replied dryly. Especially considering that until a month ago she couldn't afford designer outfits. Ramiro turned to her. What do you mean by that? Nothing. Just an observation. Listen, his voice became hard. I'm tired of your innuendos and suspicions. Soledad is our biggest asset right now. Thanks to her, the club's profits have doubled. Really? And I can't verify that because all the financial records now pass me by. Because you're being unreasonable. I'm trying to grow the business and you're only causing problems. Alejandro walked over to them. Señor Balmaceda, the radio station is calling. They want to record an interview with Soledad. Coming. Ramiro finished his whiskey. And Catalina, stop going through the files. It's interfering with work. She watched her husband walk away, feeling a growing unease. Something had changed in him, something fundamental. Where had the attentive, caring man they'd started this business with gone? After the performance, Soledad made her way down to the auditorium. She was surrounded by fans, asking for autographs and joint photos. She held herself like a real star, smiling, joking, posing. On the ring finger of her right hand shone a ring with a large diamond. Catalina remembered that ring. She and Ramiro had seen it in a jewelry store 2 weeks ago. He had looked at the display case for a long time then, but had said it wasn't the time for such a splurge. In the staff restroom, she ran into one of the waitresses, Maria. The girl looked upset. "What's wrong?" Catalina asked. "Nothing, Señora Valverde. It's just, Soledad yelled at me for accidentally spilling water near her dressing room, and then she complained to Señor Balmaceda and he took away my bonus." "What? He had no right to decide that without me." "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said." Catalina went back into her office and locked the door. She opened the safe and pulled out the club's articles of incorporation. It said in black and white that all personnel decisions had to be made jointly by both owners. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. It was the security guard. "Señora Valverde, you have a visitor. He says it's important business." A middle-aged man in an austere suit entered the office. "Good evening. My name is Fernando Castro. I'm a lawyer, and I have some information that may interest you." Catalina pointed to a chair. "I'm listening to you." "Let's just say that one of my clients was dealing with the very same consulting firm that is now actively involved with your club, and what I've learned makes me concerned." "Go on." "This firm is being used to divest assets from successful businesses. The scheme is well established. First, a portion of the proceeds are funneled through it. Then, the ownership is retitled." Catalina felt her fingers gripping the armrests of the chair. "Do you have proof?" "There is some, but we need to proceed very carefully. They're professionals and they don't just leave traces." When the lawyer left, Catalina sat motionless for a long time. Music rumbled behind the wall, the audience applauding. Apparently, Soledad had begun her second set. All these years she had trusted her husband unconditionally. They had built this business together, invested not only money but also their souls in it. Was he really capable of such a betrayal? Her thoughts were interrupted by a phone call. It was Mariana. "Turn on the news on the internet. It seems your singer is becoming a real celebrity." Catalina opened the news site. On the home page was a picture of Soledad coming out of an expensive restaurant. Ramiro walked beside her, his arm resting on her waist. The headline read, "Rising Star and Her Producer, More Than a Business Relationship?" The photo on the internet changed everything. Catalina stayed up all night sitting in the living room of their penthouse. Ramiro hadn't come home, sending a text about urgent business. She stared silently at the screen of her phone, where notifications appeared one after the other. The article was spreading across the network, forming comments and speculations. In the morning, she went to the club earlier than usual. The city was just waking up. The streets were almost empty. Near the supermarket, an elderly man was arranging fresh vegetables, and the bakery across the street smelled of fresh bread. An ordinary morning, an ordinary life. But for Catalina, it was as if the whole world had lost its colors. Paulina met her at the club. The accountant looked sleep-deprived, dark circles under her eyes. "Señora Valverde, have you seen?" she began. "Yes, I have," Catalina cut her short. Where are we on the paperwork? I've been checking the records all night. Take a look. Paulina held out a thick folder to her. Here's the movement of funds for the last 2 months. The amounts are getting higher and higher. Catalina sat down at the desk and immersed herself in studying the papers. The numbers were adding up to an unpleasant picture. Money was regularly being withdrawn through sham contracts, and new revenue from Soledad's concerts was going through a separate account to which Catalina had no access. Who signed these contracts? Señor Balmaceda. He said he had a general power of attorney, which doesn't exist. Catalina slammed the folder shut. I didn't sign one. At that moment, Alejandro entered the office without knocking. His usually impeccable appearance seemed wrinkled today, his tie sitting crooked. Señora Valverde, Anyway, Soledad is here, with her lawyer. What lawyer? They're waiting in Señor Balmaceda's office. They're talking about some new contract. Catalina stood up. I'll be right there. But Señor Balmaceda asked not to be disturbed. I'm co-owner of this club, remember? She walked determinedly toward her husband's office. Muffled voices came from behind the door. Catalina knocked and entered without waiting for an answer. Ramiro was sitting at his desk. Next to him, a gray-haired man in an expensive suit. Soledad was sitting in a chair with her leg over his. She was wearing an elegant pantsuit and her hair was styled in an impeccable style. At the sight of Catalina, she smiled faintly. Good morning, Catalina said coldly. Am I interrupting? Actually, we're discussing important business. Ramiro looked annoyed. Which concern the club. Then I have a right to be present. Have a seat, Señora Valverde. The lawyer pointed to an empty chair. We are just discussing a new format of cooperation with Señorita Valdez. Interesting to hear. You see, the lawyer pulled out documents from his briefcase. Given the growing popularity of performances, we propose to create a separate company to organize concerts. This will optimize taxation and simplify management. And who will be the owner of this company? Señor Balmaceda and Señorita Valdez, naturally, as the main stakeholders. Catalina felt her hands involuntarily clench into fists. And I, then, am I not an interested party? Honey, Ramiro interjected, it's just business, nothing personal. Nothing personal? She shifted her gaze to Soledad. Are the pictures on the internet a business too? I don't know what you mean, the singer feigned surprise. We were just discussing work stuff over dinner. At 3 a.m? At the most expensive restaurant in town? That's enough! Ramiro slapped his palm on the table. You're being unprofessional. If you can't discuss business matters calmly, you'd better leave. Business matters? Catalina stood up. Okay, let's discuss business matters. For example, illegal withdrawal of funds through shell companies, or forged contracts, or… Señora Valverde, her lawyer interrupted, I advise you to be careful what you say. Such accusations can have serious consequences. Is that a threat? Just friendly advice, he smiled, showing perfectly white teeth. There was a knock on the door. It was the secretary. Señor Balmaceda, the television station, is calling. They want to interview Señorita Valdez. I'll take care of it, Soledad rose gracefully. Shall we continue later? She walked out, leaving behind a trail of expensive perfume. The lawyer stood up as well, gathering his papers. Think about our proposal, Señora Valverde. Sometimes compromise is the best solution. When it was just the two of them, Ramiro rubbed his temples tiredly. Why did you make this scene? A scene? You take money out of our mutual business and I make a scene. It's not what you think it is. Really? Then explain it to me. Explain why you're hiding documents from me. Why you're making strange payments. Why… Enough! He stood up abruptly. I don't have to account to you for every decision. I built this business. We did. Together. And what did you do? Sitting in an office, poring over paperwork. I was the one who found investors, negotiated with suppliers, solved problems. And now you're solving problems with Soledad? With restaurants and hotels? He grabbed his keys off the table. I'm not discussing that. I have a meeting. Catalina watched the door close behind him. A receptionist was typing something in the reception area, and the sounds of music came from the auditorium. The technicians were checking the equipment before the evening's performance. She returned to her office and dialed Mariana's number. Where are you now? At work. What's wrong? We need to meet. It's urgent. Come to my office. In an hour. Catalina packed her bag, photocopied a few important documents. At the exit, she ran into Soledad, who was just finishing up a phone call. Oh, Senora Valverde. The singer tucked the phone into her Prada purse. Leaving already? What about tonight's performance? I have more important things to do. That's a shame. I've prepared a new song. I think the audience will like it. I'm sure they will. You know? Soledad took a step closer. Sometimes you just have to accept the inevitable. It makes it easier on everyone. What do you mean? Well, we're both grown women. Why complicate things? Catalina looked her straight in the eye. You're right. We are grown women, and I'm not going to just give away what is rightfully mine. Suit yourself, Soledad shrugged. Just be warned. I know how to fight for what's mine, too. Catalina stepped outside. The bright sun was blinding her eyes, cars honking somewhere in the distance. An ordinary day in Santiago, but for her, the world would never be the same again. She pulled out her phone and dialed another number, Fernando Castro's lawyer. It was time to take action. Mariana's office was located in a modern building in Santiago's business center. Catalina went up to the 15th floor where her friend was already waiting for her. Mariana's spacious office was flooded with sunlight, 2 cups of freshly brewed coffee on the desk. You look terrible, Mariana stated, looking at her friend carefully. Thanks for the compliment. Catalina sank into a chair. Have you seen the morning news? About your husband and his protégé? I did, so what are you going to do? Catalina pulled out a file folder. Look, here's the movement of funds over the last 2 months. They're not even particularly hidden. Mariana, being a financial analyst, quickly looked over the papers. Yes, the scheme is obvious. Withdrawing money through fictitious contracts, setting up a parallel structure, classic raiding. What do I do, Marie? For starters, gather all the evidence. Do you have access to bank statements? Partially. Ramiro changed the passwords to the main accounts, but I can see the old transactions. At that moment, Catalina's phone vibrated. A message came in from Alejandro. Urgent meeting at 7 p.m. Attendance is mandatory. They're up to something. Catalina showed the message to her friend. You need to be there, but be careful. Back at the club, Catalina noticed an unusual buzz of activity. The maintenance staff was setting up extra lighting equipment, and waiters were setting up new tables in the VIP area. What's going on? She asked a waitress who ran past. Getting ready for the big concert. Señorita Valdez will be presenting her first album. What album? She didn't get an answer. The girl was already hurrying onward. Catalina went up to the administrative part of the building. As she passed Ramiro's office, she heard voices. The door was ajar. Everything is ready, a male voice was saying. The same lawyer. The papers are drawn up. All that's left to do is sign them. And if she refuses? It was Soledad's voice. She won't, Ramiro spoke now. She won't have a choice. We'll have transferred all the major assets by then. And the staff? They trust her. The staff will go after the money. We'll offer them better terms in the new company. Catalina pulled out her phone and turned on the recorder. Her hands shook, but she forced herself to stand still. Tomorrow, then, the lawyer asked. Yes. We'll announce the restructuring at the meeting. Then we'll sign the transfer papers right away. And if she resists? I have dirt. Small irregularities in the tax returns that I purposely made on her behalf. If she starts to flinch, we'll threaten criminal charges." Soledad laughed softly. "You've thought of everything, sweetheart. Anything for you." The sound of a kiss. Catalina gripped the phone tighter. "By the way," Ramiro continued, "I've booked us a house on the coast. We'll celebrate our success this weekend." Sounds like fun. Will your wife be okay with that?" "By the weekend, she'll have nothing to do with the club or me." Catalina heard footsteps and quickly moved away from the door. A minute later, the lawyer came out of the office, followed by Soledad fixing her lipstick. Ramiro remained inside. She went back into her office and locked the door. Her hands were still shaking as she listened to the tape. The quality wasn't perfect, but the words were clearly distinguishable. She spent the next hour copying every document she could get her hands on. Bank statements, contracts, internal orders, all were sent to a secure folder in the cloud storage. At 6:30, there was a knock on the door. It was Paulina. "Señora Valverde, may I speak to you?" "Sure, come in." The accountant looked worried. "I'm quitting. I can't be a part of this anymore." "In what exactly?" "You know, these fictitious contracts, forged signatures. I'm a professional. I don't work that way." Catalina looked at her carefully. "Paulina, are you ready to give formal testimony about the irregularities?" Don't know. It's dangerous. I'll protect you. I promise." At 7 o'clock, the conference room was full. All the key personnel of the club had gathered. Ramiro sat at the head of the table with Soledad and their lawyer next to him. Catalina took a seat at the far end of the table. "So," Ramiro began, "I have an important announcement to make. Our club is going to a new level. We're creating an entertainment holding company that will consolidate several venues in the city." A surprised whisper swept through the room. "The holding company will be run by a new company. All contracts will be renegotiated. The staff will get better conditions." "What about the existing management structure?" one of the managers asked. "It will be optimized," the lawyer intervened. "You'll find out all the details at the general meeting tomorrow." Catalina sat in silence, watching the reactions of the employees. Some looked worried, others looked interested. Alejandro studiously avoided her gaze. After the meeting, she lingered in the room, pretending to study the papers. Gradually, everyone left. Ramiro and Soledad were the last to leave. "Don't stay out too late, dear," her husband tossed. "Tomorrow is an important day." When they left, Catalina pulled out her cell phone and dialed the number of Fernando Castro's lawyer and made an appointment. She packed her things and left the club through the service entrance. The evening air was perfumed with the smell of jasmine, and music wafted from the open windows of a neighboring house. A normal evening in Santiago, but for Catalina it was the last night of her old life. In her purse was a cell phone with a recording that was going to change everything. Now they had to act quickly and decisively. They planned to strip her of everything tomorrow, but she had a plan of her own. And that plan began tonight at Fernando Castro's office. Attorney Fernando Castro's office was located in an old building with stucco on the facade. Catalina and Paulina climbed the marble staircase to the 3rd floor. They were met in the reception area by an elderly receptionist who immediately ushered them into the office. Fernando Castro sat behind a massive oak desk piled with file folders. His strict suit and attentive gaze inspired confidence. This man knew what he was doing. "Have a seat, señores," he pointed to the chairs. "We don't have much time. Let's get right to it." Catalina pulled out her cell phone and turned on the recording. As she listened, the lawyer's face grew more and more serious. "This is very serious evidence," he said when the recording ended. "Señora Rojas, are you ready to confirm the facts of the financial fraud?" Paulina nervously rubbed the strap of her purse. "Yes, I have copies of all the documents. Forged signatures, bogus contracts, it's all here." She pulled out a thick folder and placed it on the table. Fernando quickly looked through the contents. "Great. Now we need to act fast. Are they planning a shareholders meeting tomorrow? Yes, at 10 in the morning, Catalina confirmed. Then we have time to prepare the documents for court. But there's something else we need to do. What's that? Evidence that your husband acted willfully. A recording of the conversation is good, but we need more. Catalina thought for a moment. There should be original documents in his office. He always keeps important papers in a safe behind a painting. Do you know the code? Yes, it's our wedding date. He never changed it. Figured I wouldn't guess to look in there. Fernando tapped his fingers on the table. We need those documents, but we need to proceed with caution. I can go back to the club right now. There's only security and janitors there at this time. That's dangerous, Paulina interjected. What if Senor Balmaceda is there too? No, I know his schedule. He always has dinner with the vendors at the restaurant on Wednesdays. Fernando nodded. Okay, but you won't be going alone. I'll send my assistant with you. He's a documentation specialist. And take this. He pulled a small tape recorder from his desk drawer. Professional technique, better recording quality than on a cell phone. By the time they left the lawyer's office, the sky had already darkened. Fernando's assistant, a young man named Marcos, was waiting for them in a black sedan. There was a new security guard on duty at the club's service entrance. Catalina didn't know him. He tried to block their way, but she reminded him stiffly of her status as owner of the establishment. The building was unusually quiet. Only from the back rooms came the voices of the janitors. Catalina went up to the administrative area, Marcos following her with his camera at the ready. Ramiro's office was locked, but Catalina had her own key. Inside it smelled of cigars and Soledad's expensive perfume. On the table were some papers, an unfinished glass of whiskey, and an autographed picture of the singer. Catalina walked over to the painting, a landscape overlooking the Andes, and took it off the wall. She dialed the code on the safe's electronic lock, 240318. The door opened. Inside were folders of documents, several envelopes, and a jewelry box, a gift she never received for her last birthday. Catalina pulled out the papers and began looking through them with Marcos. Here, he said quietly, pointing to one of the documents. A contract for the formation of a new company. Look, the date of incorporation is 3 months ago, just as Señorita Valdez showed up. And a list of assets to be transferred. Catalina ran her eyes over the document. They want to take everything, the building, the equipment, the contracts with suppliers. And what's this? Marcos pulled out another folder. Inside were pictures. Ramiro and Soledad in different places, on the beach, in a restaurant, leaving the hotel. Some of the pictures showed them kissing. The dates on the back showed that the affair began almost immediately after the singer appeared at the club. Suddenly, footsteps and voices were heard in the hallway. Catalina froze. Just forgot the contract folder, it was Ramiro's voice. Honey, you're working too hard. And it was Soledad. Catalina quickly put the documents back in the safe, leaving only the most important ones. Marcos had already hidden the camera and was standing by the door. This way, she whispered, pointing to a small door leading to a back room. They managed to escape a second before Ramiro and Soledad entered the office. Every word could be heard through the thin partition. It'll all be over tomorrow, Ramiro was saying. We'll sign the papers and the club will be ours. And your wife? She won't be able to do anything. All the documents are ready. The lawyers have checked everything. Besides, she has no proof. Are you sure? She's been suspicious lately. Let her be suspicious. The important thing is that by 10 o'clock tomorrow morning it'll all be over. Catalina stood slumped against the wall. The dictaphone in her hand continued to record. Marcos silently photographed the documents they had managed to grab. By the way, Ramiro continued, I've booked tickets to Buenos Aires for next week. You'll present your album there and we'll celebrate the beginning of a new life. Mm-hmm. Sounds like fun. What about the staff at the club? We'll keep the loyal ones. The rest will be replaced. I already have a list of candidates. They talked some more about some details of the upcoming event. Then Ramiro found the right folder and they left. Catalina waited a few more minutes before coming out of hiding. Do we have everything we need? She asked Marcos. More than enough. Senor Castro will be pleased. They cautiously exited the office and made their way downstairs. An unpleasant surprise awaited them at the exit. The same new guard was on the phone. Yes, Senor Balmaceda, they are still here. No, I don't know what they were doing upstairs. Catalina headed resolutely for the exit. Let us through, immediately. Senor Balmaceda asked me to detain you. I still own this club. If you don't open the door now, you'll be looking for a new job tomorrow. The guard hesitated. That second was enough. Marcos had already opened the door and they jumped out. A minute later, a car was whisking them away from the club. Take the papers to Senor Castro, Catalina said as they stopped at a stoplight. And I'm going home. I need to get ready for tomorrow. Are you sure you should go home? It could be dangerous. Ramiro doesn't know we have proof. He won't do anything until tomorrow's meeting. At home, Catalina showered first thing, trying to wash away the tension of the evening. Then she sat down at her computer and wrote a detailed letter describing all of her husband's machinations. She sent copies to several addresses: herself, Mariana, her lawyer. In the bedroom, she pulled a business suit out of the closet, dark blue, austere, but elegant. It would be just right tomorrow. She thought about how her life had changed over the past month as she straightened the non-existent creases in her jacket. Her phone vibrated. There was a message from Fernando Castro. Got the papers. Everything is ready for tomorrow. Meet me at 9:30 at the clubhouse entrance. Catalina sent a short "okay" and went to bed. Tomorrow was a big day ahead of her, a day where she would fight for everything that was rightfully hers. The morning was overcast. Gray clouds hung over Santiago, threatening rain. Catalina woke up early. Sleep had not come all night. She slowly tidied herself up, every movement precise and precise. Makeup was subtle but flawless. Jewelry, only her wedding ring, which seemed especially heavy today. The dark blue suit fit perfectly, the heels of her shoes tapping confidently on the parquet. She turned on the coffee maker in the kitchen, but she didn't drink coffee, her hands trembling from the strain. On the table in the living room were pictures of her and Ramiro, happy moments from the past that now seemed like stills from an alien movie. The phone showed 9 o'clock. In 30 minutes she should meet Fernando Castro outside the club. Catalina checked the contents of her bag: documents, tape recorder, cell phone with recordings all in place. Going down to the underground parking lot, she noticed that Ramiro's spot was empty. He hadn't been home last night. She didn't expect him back, though. In recent weeks, he'd been staying at work or at a friend's house more and more often. It took less time than usual to get to the club. The streets were unusually deserted, as if the city had fallen silent in anticipation of an impending storm. Catalina parked in her usual spot and saw that a small group of people had already gathered at the entrance. Fernando Castro stood a little to the side, talking on the phone. Next to him, Paulina was shuffling from foot to foot, clutching a folder of documents. Alejandro was smoking a little farther away, avoiding looking in their direction. "Good morning," Catalina approached the lawyer. "Is everything ready?" "Yes, the documents are prepared. As soon as the meeting starts." He didn't have time to finish. Ramiro's black SUV pulled up to the entrance. Ramiro, Soledad, and their lawyer got out. 2 more cars pulled up with some strangers in business suits. "Ah, darling," Ramiro smiled strainedly. "Didn't expect to see you here." "Really? Where else would I be during an important stockholders meeting?" "You see," he made a sign to security, "the meeting has been rescheduled, and you, unfortunately, no longer have access to the club. Two guards stood in front of the entrance. Catalina recognized one of them, the same new employee who had tried to detain her yesterday. What does that mean? She turned to her husband. On what grounds? On the basis of this, their lawyer intervened, holding out some papers. A temporary ban from the club premises due to suspected financial fraud. What? Catalina snatched up the papers. This is absurd. I'm a co-owner. Was a co-owner. Soledad stepped forward. She was wearing an elegant white dress, diamonds sparkling in her ears, the same ones Catalina had seen in her husband's safe. Now the situation has changed. Ramiro, you can't do that, Catalina tried to speak calmly, though everything was boiling inside. You don't have that authority. Actually, I do. He pulled a folder out of his briefcase. Remember the power of attorney you signed 3 months ago? The one about delegating emergency management authority? I never signed such a document. Did you? He held out the paper. And the signature looks a lot like yours. Catalina looked at the document. The signature was indeed similar, so similar that only an expert would be able to detect a forgery. It's a forgery, Fernando Castro interjected. We have proof. And who are you? Ramiro's lawyer stepped forward. Senora Valverde's legal representative, and I insist that a shareholders' meeting be called immediately. That won't be necessary, Ramiro waved his hand. All the decisions have already been made. By the way, Catalina, you'd better vacate the parking space. It's now reserved for other employees. By this point, a small crowd had gathered at the entrance. Club staff, security guards, and random passers-by. Everyone watched the unfolding scene with interest. Senor Balmaceda, Paulina stepped forward. I'm prepared to testify to financial irregularities and falsification of documents. You're fired, Ramiro retorted. And I'd think twice if I were you before making statements like that. Some interesting details from your past might come to light. Paulina turned pale and backed away. Catalina put a hand on her shoulder. Don't be afraid. We have proof. What proof? Soledad laughed. Those papers you tried to steal from the office yesterday? We know all about it. No, sweetheart, Catalina smiled for the first time in ages. The real evidence. Recordings of your conversations, transfer documents, photographs. My lawyers already have it all. She noticed the way Ramiro's face trembled. You're bluffing. But there was uncertainty in his voice. Really? Would you like me to tell you the content of your conversation in the study yesterday? About Buenos Aires, about your new life, about how you plan to get rid of me? Security! Ramiro barked. Get her off the club grounds. I wouldn't advise it, Fernando Castro said calmly. Any use of force would be considered assault, and given the number of witnesses, he pointed to the people gathered. Many were filming what was happening on their phones. Catalina, Ramiro lowered his voice. Let's talk calmly. After all, we're adults. It's too late, Ramiro. You've made your choice. You'll never get anywhere anyway. I have connections, lawyers. I have the truth, and a willingness to fight for what's rightfully mine. At that moment, the rain began to fall. Soledad pulled out an umbrella and tried to cover Ramiro with it, but he waved it away irritably. Let's get out of here, he tossed. Let's continue this conversation in the legal field. They headed toward the club's entrance. The guards parted, letting them through. Soledad was the last to go. She turned around and threw Catalina a triumphant look. What now? Paulina asked quietly. Now we go to court, Fernando Castro replied. We have all the necessary documents, and time is playing us. The longer they try to run the club, the more traces they'll leave. But first, we need to meet with one person who can help us find out more details about a rising star, Soledad. The rain was getting heavier. Catalina glanced at the club's sign. The neon letters Moonlight were off, as if the building itself refused to acknowledge the new owners. Let's go, She turned to the lawyer. "We have a lot of work to do." The club staff began to disperse. Some approached Catalina, expressing support. Alejandro stood to the side with his eyes downcast. Catalina got into her car. In the rearview mirror, she saw Ramiro and Soledad appear on the second-floor balcony. They were arguing about something, the singer waving her arms. I wondered if she realized that she was just a pawn in someone else's game, that Ramiro was using her as he had once used Catalina himself. But it didn't matter anymore. Today was the beginning of a new chapter in her life, and this time she would dictate the rules. In the meeting room of Fernando Castro's office sat journalist Antonio Mendez. "So there was a similar story in Viña del Mar?" Catalina pitched forward. "Yes, I was working for the local newspaper at the time." Antonio flipped through the pages of his notebook. Soledad Valdez showed up at the Esmeralda Casino about the same way, a young singer looking for her chance. 3 months later, the casino owner divorced his wife, rewrote some of the assets to a new company. The story ended tragically. He died in a car accident, and the casino was soon sold. And what happened to Soledad? Disappeared. Just left one day, taking all the money out of her accounts. Then, 6 months later, she resurfaced in Conception, but something didn't work out there. Fernando made notes in his notebook. "Do you have documentary evidence?" "Of course," the journalist pulled out a flash drive. "There are copies of all the articles, witness statements, photographs. I put together a whole dossier back then, but the editor cut the story. 2 powerful people were involved." At that moment, Mariana entered the office with the news. "The club just called. Alejandro wants to meet." "Alejandro?" Catalina wondered. "He's on Ramiro's side. Says he has important information, and he's afraid." Fernando adjusted his glasses. "Where does he want to meet?" "At the El Mirador Café in an hour." "It could be a trap," Antonio warned. In Viña del Mar, too, there were people ready to talk, but at the last moment they disappeared or recanted. Catalina stood up. "I'll go. Alejandro has been working with us for 5 years. I know his family." "Then I'm with you," Mariana said firmly. "And we'll take Marcos to back us up." El Mirador Café was located in a quiet part of town. Catalina and Mariana took a table by the window. Marcos settled at a neighboring table, pretending to read a newspaper. Alejandro showed up at exactly the appointed time, pale, nervous, eyes red from lack of sleep. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly, looking around constantly. "There's something I have to tell you." "What's wrong, Alejandro?" "Something terrible is going on at the club. They're laying off old employees, hiring some suspicious people. They brought in new equipment yesterday, supposedly for Soledad's show, but it's clearly not music equipment." "Then what is it?" "Looks like equipment for an underground casino. I overheard a conversation. They're planning to remodel the upstairs." Catalina glanced over to Mariana. An illegal casino was a whole other level of trouble. "Do you have proof?" Alejandro pulled out his phone. "I photographed the invoices and took some pictures of the equipment. Also," he lowered his voice to a whisper, "I know where the money from Soledad's concerts goes." "Where?" "Remember the new bartender, Diego? He's not just any bartender. Every night after the show, he collects the cash and takes it to the office on the 3rd floor. They count it and take it somewhere. No paperwork, nothing." "What about tax records?" "The official reports only show part of the proceeds. The rest just disappears." Mariana was quickly writing something down on her phone. Catalina could feel the big picture taking shape. The whole thing was no longer just a family conflict, but a serious crime. "Why did you decide to tell me this now?" she asked Alejandro. He hunched over as if trying to make himself smaller. "Yesterday they beat up old Miguel. Remember, the security guard. He refused to sign a new contract, started asking questions. Now he's in the hospital, and I realized it's only going to get worse." "Are you ready to testify on the record?" "Yes, but—" he licked his lips nervously. I need assurances of safety. I have a family, children. I'll talk to the prosecutor, came a voice from behind him. It was Fernando Castro, stealthily approaching their table. We have a witness protection program. Alejandro visibly relaxed. They spent the next hour discussing details, what exactly he'd seen, what documents he could provide, who else on the staff was willing to talk. When they left the cafe, clouds covered the sky. Catalina buttoned her coat. The spring evenings in Santiago were chilly. This changes everything, Mariana said. Now we have evidence not only of fraud, but of more serious crimes. Yes, but the risks have increased as well, Fernando was serious. If they are really connected to the illegal gambling business, they will resist to the last. At that moment, Catalina's phone buzzed. A message came in from an unknown number. Meet me? We need to talk. Ramiro. Don't even think about it. Mariana glanced at the screen. This is clearly a trap. Agreed, Fernando nodded. Right now, any contact with him could be dangerous. Catalina deleted the message. Don't worry, I'm not that naive. Better tell me, what are we going to do with the information from Alejandro? I'll contact the prosecutor's office, the lawyer replied. And you go back to the office. We need to prepare all the documents for tomorrow's hearing. At the office, Antonio was waiting for them with news. He had found another witness from Viña del Mar, a former casino employee willing to talk about Soledad's schemes. It's already a whole story, the journalist showed photos on his laptop. Look, it's the same handwriting everywhere. She finds a successful business, rubs her way into the owner's confidence, then the paperwork problems start, strange financial transactions. What about the people who helped her? Catalina asked. Most of them just disappeared. Some went abroad, some got rich dramatically and bought real estate in other cities. The trail usually leads to offshore companies. Paulina, who had been working with the documents all this time, looked up. I have something interesting. Remember that strange transfer to a company in Panama? I found a connection. The same company was involved in the Esmeralda casino case. So, the scheme is worked out, Fernando rubbed his chin. They're just repeating what they've done before. The courthouse towered over the plaza, its classical columns giving the structure a solemn appearance. Despite the early hour, reporters had already gathered outside the entrance. News of the upcoming session had leaked to the press. Catalina stepped out of Fernando's car, clutching the file folder tightly. She was wearing a strict black suit, her hair in a neat bundle, no jewelry, only her wedding ring, which she had decided to wear for the last time. Mariana walked beside her, supporting her friend under her arm. They were followed by Fernando and his two assistants, laden with folders of evidence. Paulina seated just behind, nervously rubbing the strap of her purse. "Señora Valverde, Señora Valverde," shouted the journalist, trying to get closer. "Comment on the situation with the club." "No comment," Fernando replied firmly, making his way through the crowd. In the court lobby, Antonio Mendez was already waiting for them. The journalist looked excited. "They're here. Ramiro came with a whole team of lawyers, and Soledad is with them." Catalina tensed involuntarily. It was one thing to prepare for a meeting and quite another to actually come face to face with the traitors. "Where are they?" Fernando asked. "In the East Wing. One more thing, Judge Morales was seen with them. He's not supposed to be prosecuting this case, but—" "Morales?" Fernando frowned. "That could be a problem. He has a reputation for being prone to certain arrangements." They went up to the second floor. The hallway was crowded. In addition to the journalists, club employees and casual gawkers attracted by the hype had arrived. Catalina noticed Alejandro nervously shuffling from foot to foot near the window. A policeman stood next to him. The witness protection program was working. 15 minutes to go. Fernando checked his watch. "Let's repeat the strategy. First, we present evidence of document forgery, then financial fraud, then witness testimony. Catalina, are you ready? She nodded. They had rehearsed her presentation many times over the past few days. Every word, every gesture was calibrated. At that moment, a group of people appeared at the opposite end of the corridor. Ramiro was in the lead, in an expensive gray suit, as confident as ever. Next to him was Soledad, in an elegant white dress with perfect hair and makeup. They were followed by three men in strict suits, obviously lawyers. Their gazes met. Ramiro froze for a moment, then tried to put on a friendly smile. "Catalina, my dear, can't we talk like civilized people after all?" "All conversation is through lawyers," she retorted, looking away. "What coldness!" Soledad stretched out. "And yet we could have found a compromise." "Really?" Catalina turned toward her. "Like in Viña del Mar? Or like in Conception?" The singer's smile trembled. Ramiro quickly took her under his arm. "Come on, we need to get ready." They walked past, and Catalina smelled the familiar scent of her husband's perfume. Now it mingled with Soledad's cloyingly sweet perfume. "Don't let them piss you off," Mariana said quietly. "That's what they're counting on." The courtroom was cool. Catalina sat down next to Fernando, feeling her heart pounding. On the other side of the hall sat Ramiro and his team. Soledad sat a little farther away, ostentatiously studying her manicure. Gradually, the hall filled up. Paulina, Alejandro, and other club employees came in. Journalists took the last rows, taking out notebooks and dictaphones. Antonio Mendez arranged himself so that he could see all the participants in the trial. When the judge appeared, Catalina was relieved. It was Judge Valencia, known for her impartiality and integrity. So the attempt to influence the judge's appointment had failed. "All rise, please. Court is now in session." The official part began, the presentation of the parties, the essence of the lawsuit. Fernando spoke clearly and confidently, stating the facts one by one. Catalina watched Ramiro's reaction. He kept a nonchalant expression on his face, but his fingers tapped nervously on the table. "Your Honor," Fernando pulled out the first evidence folder, "we wish to present evidence of systematic fraud and document forgery." He began laying out the papers, signature examinations, financial statements, bank statements. Each document was accompanied by a detailed explanation. "As you can see, Senora Valverde's signature on this power of attorney is forged. Here is the opinion of 3 independent experts." Ramiro's attorneys immediately began to object, claiming that the expertise was flawed. A legal skirmish ensued. "Gentlemen," Judge Valencia tapped her gavel, "let's keep order. Proceed, Senor Castro." The next item was financial fraud. Paulina, called as a witness, spoke in a trembling voice about strange transfers and sham contracts. "And you are prepared to testify that these transactions were carried out without the knowledge of Senora Valverde?" "Yes," replied the accountant firmly. "Moreover, when I tried to point out the irregularities, Senor Balmaceda forbade me to discuss it with anyone." Ramiro whispered something to his lawyer. The man stood up. "Your Honor, we want to present documents proving that Senora Rojas herself was involved in the financial fraud." "Objection!" Fernando jumped in. "This is an attempt to pressure the witness." "Objection sustained," the judge nodded. "Proceed, Senora Rojas." Paulina detailed the scheme to funnel money through shell companies. Catalina saw Soledad begin tapping her heel nervously on the floor. Alejandro was the next witness. He talked about the strange equipment, the new employees with questionable reputations, the unaccounted cash from the concerts. "Now," Fernando pulled out a tape recorder, "we'd like to introduce an audio recording of a conversation between the defendants where they discuss the details of their plan." "Objection!" Attorney Ramiro jumped in. "This recording was obtained illegally." Overruled. The judge looked at the documents. The recording was made in a public place where the conversation is not supposed to be confidential. As the voices of Ramiro and Soledad discussed how they would get rid of Catalina, a silence hung in the room. Catalina stared straight ahead, trying not to react to the words, each of which hurt. Now, Fernando waited for the tape to end. I would like to call a witness from Viña del Mar. A whisper swept through the hall. Soledad straightened abruptly, her face pale. Ramiro looked at her incomprehensibly. An elderly man, the former manager of the Esmeralda Casino, entered the room. He detailed the story of how a similar scheme had been carried out in his establishment 3 years ago. And can you identify the participants in those events? Yes, he pointed to Soledad. This woman introduced herself by a different name at the time, but it's definitely her. Ramiro turned slowly toward Soledad. The look of shock on his face, he didn't seem to know the whole truth about his new lover. The hearing had been going on for hours. The judge adjourned for an hour. As they left the courtroom, Catalina saw Ramiro arguing intensely with Soledad in the corner. Everything is going according to plan, Fernando whispered. They're getting nervous. After the break, we'll present the documents about the underground casino. That'll be the final blow. Catalina nodded. The first round was behind them, but the battle wasn't over yet. There was more evidence, testimonies, and revelations ahead, and she was willing to go through it to the end to get back what was rightfully hers. After the recess, the atmosphere in the courtroom changed markedly. Ramiro and Soledad now sat at a distance from each other, avoiding eye contact. Their lawyers were quietly conferring, passing papers to each other. Catalina noticed one of them shaking his head, clearly unhappy with what was happening. Judge Valencia returned to the room exactly 1 hour later. Her stern face expressed no emotion, only tiredness in her eyes. The meeting had already lasted many hours. We will continue the hearing. Señor Castro, did you wish to present additional evidence? Fernando rose from his seat. Yes, Your Honor. We wish to present documents regarding the illegal activities that have taken place at the Moonlight Club in recent weeks. He pulled out a new folder. Catalina noticed Ramiro tense up, his fingers digging into the armrests of the chair. Specifically, it's about preparations for the opening of an underground casino, Fernando began, laying out the documents. Here are delivery notes for special equipment disguised as music equipment. Here are witness statements about the layout of the premises, and these are the photographs taken by our witnesses. The pictures appeared on the big screen, boxes with distinctive labeling, drawings of the top floor remodeling, documents with seals of offshore companies. Objection! Attorney Ramiro jumped in. These photographs were obtained illegally. Overruled. The judge studied the documents. The photographs were taken in the public areas of the club by employees with access to those premises. Fernando continued. Moreover, we have information linking these activities to similar establishments in other cities, in particular with the infamous Esmeralda Casino in Viña del Mar. A whisper swept through the auditorium. Journalists in the back rows were feverishly scribbling in their notebooks. Your Honor, Ramiro's lead attorney rose, we categorically reject these insinuations. There was no casino planned. This is a normal concert facility for Señorita Valdez's performances. In that case, Fernando smiled, can you explain why the invoices bear the stamp of a company specializing in the supply of gambling equipment? And why the same company was involved in the Esmeralda Casino case? Soledad whispered something to her lawyer. He shook his head and replied something. She turned pale and began to gather her purse. Señorita Valdez, the judge's voice was stern. Please remain seated. The court still has questions for you. The singer froze, her hands trembling. Ramiro looked at her with the expression of a man who had just realized he had been used. And now, Fernando pulled out the last folder, the best part. We've traced the chain of money transfers. All the funds withdrawn from the club went through a series of shell companies and ended up in accounts in a Panamanian bank. The owner of those accounts is a company owned by—" He paused. "To Señorita Valdez's ex-husband, whose existence she somehow forgot to mention." Ramiro turned sharply to Soledad. "What?" "Honey, it's not what you think," she began, but he interrupted her. "Shut up. Just shut up." Silence in the courtroom. The judge tapped her gavel. "Señor Balmaceda, please observe order." Catalina watched this scene with a strange sense of devastation. The man she loved, the man she trusted, had turned out to be not only a traitor, but a deluded fool. Fernando continued to present evidence. One by one, the witnesses came up. Club employees, suppliers, even the driver who took the money to the bank. Each told a different part of the story, and gradually a complete picture of the criminal scheme emerged. Ramiro's lawyers conferred about something. The lead defense attorney stood up. "Your Honor, we ask for a recess to consult with our client." "Denied. You've had ample time to prepare." Ramiro turned pale. His sultry face was covered with sweat, his perfectly styled hair disheveled. "In that case," he stood up suddenly, "I want to make a statement." "Ramiro, no!" His lawyer tried to stop him, but it was too late. "I admit that I acted illegally," Ramiro's voice trembled. "But I was misled. That woman," he pointed at Soledad, "manipulated me, used me. You lowlife." Soledad jumped up. "Silence!" The judge banged the gavel again. "Stop this at once." But it was too late. Ramiro and Soledad began shouting accusations at each other, revealing more and more details of their machinations. Their lawyers tried to calm them down, but to no avail. Catalina sat motionless, staring straight ahead. Somewhere in the back of her mind she felt a strange satisfaction. They had exposed themselves, destroyed their plans. At last the judge adjourned for judgment. The police stood at the door. No one was allowed to leave the courthouse. "It went even better than we planned," Fernando whispered. "Their confessions in the courtroom are the final nail in the coffin lid." Mariana squeezed her friend's hand tightly. "You did good." The hour of waiting seemed like an eternity. Catalina sat in the hallway, looking out the window at the square in front of the court. A whole crowd had gathered there. Journalists, gawkers, club employees. Everyone was waiting for the decision. When the judge returned to the hall, the air seemed to thicken with tension. "Having heard all parties and examined the evidence presented," she began, "the court comes to the following decision." Her voice sounded clear and confident, each word dropping like a stone. All documents signed after the appearance of the forged power of attorney were declared null and void. Catalina's ownership of the club was being restored in full. Ramiro and Soledad were to reimburse all illegally withdrawn funds. In addition, the judge added, the case file will be forwarded to the prosecutor's office to initiate criminal proceedings for grand fraud. Applause erupted in the hall. Catalina felt tears running down her cheeks, not from grief, but from relief. It was over. Justice had been served. Ramiro sat with his head down. As Catalina left the hall, she stopped for a moment next to her ex-husband. "You know, Ramiro, I have to thank you." He raised a surprised look at her. "You showed me who you really are, and that's the most valuable lesson of my life." She turned and walked toward the exit where Mariana, Fernando, and all those who had supported her through this struggle were waiting for her. There was a lot of work ahead. They had to rebuild the club, get it up and running, get its reputation back. But now the main thing was done. The truth had triumphed and the traitors had gotten what they deserved.